Namaskar, good morning, and happy Sunday to all the children, parents, teachers, and viewers. As you know, Vidyarthi Vigyan Manthan has been trying to give you all the possible resources in whatever the best possible way from the organizing team of VVM 2020-21. As you all are aware, on the 1st of November, we launched Vidyarthi Vigyan Manthan app for the mock examination. And I'm quite sure most of you must have tried the mock examination. And if you are not, I request on behalf of the entire team to please start use of VVM application through Google Play Store and get yourself confident about the Vidyarthi Vigyan Manthan application environment so that when you try to go for the final examination on 29th or 30th of November, you will not have much problems in that. सभी विद्यार्थी, अभिभावक, अध्यापक और सभी दर्शकों को अरविंद रानडे का नमस्कार। जैसे आप जानते ही हैं, आयोजकों की तरफ से हम हमेशा प्रयास कर रहे हैं कि विद्यार्थी विज्ञान मंथन में पंजीकृत किए हुए सभी विद्यार्थियों को जब कभी एक अच्छा समय हो और उनको जितना हो सके उनके विज्ञान के लिए रुचि बनने के लिए हम अपनी तरफ से मेहनत करते हैं ताकि आपके पास अलग अलग विषय के जानकार लोग आपके साथ चर्चा कर सकें और मुख्य रूप से आपके पाठ्यक्रम में और आपके जो सिलेबस है उसके अंदर से कुछ विषय आपके साथ साझा किया जाए। इसी के साथ मैं सभी विद्यार्थियों को अनुरोध करता हूं कि 1 नवंबर को जो हमने विद्यार्थी विज्ञान मंथन का एप्लीकेशन लॉन्च किया है, उन सभी विद्यार्थियों को इसका इस्तेमाल करना सीखना होगा और मॉक एग्जामिनेशन हर एक के लिए अनिवार्य है क्योंकि आप इस आने वाले दिनों में इस मॉक एग्जाम के माध्यम से एक फाइनल एग्जाम के समय हमें ऐप का इन्वायरमेंट कैसे होगा, आप एग्जाम के जो क्वेश्चंस है उसको आप कैसे आंसर कर सके, इन सभी के बारे में जानकारी आप अभी जो हम ट्रेनिंग चल रही है उससे आपको इसका अभ्यास होगा। तो मैं आपसे अनुरोध करता हूं कि आपने अगर इस मॉक का फायदा उठाया है तो बहुत ही अच्छी बात है, अगर नहीं है तो प्लीज उसको डाउनलोड करके मॉक एग्जाम देने का प्रयास करें और अभी सभी आपके मित्रजनों को जिन्होंने विद्यार्थी विज्ञान मंथन में पंजीकृत किया है उनको आप जरूर अनुरोध करिए और उनको विनती करके इसको ऐप के माध्यम से मॉक एग्जाम देने के लिए प्रवृत्त करिए। जैसे हम जानते हैं कि सिंस लास्ट अबाउट अ कपल ऑफ मंथ्स टाइम we an organizing team is trying to bring various resource people, and in fact all the members, those who have delivered the talk, especially towards the syllabus that we have advocated for the Vidyarthi Vigyan Manthan 2020-21 have come from all the family members of Vidyarthi Vigyan Manthan, either a part of core team or a part of an academic team. Today is our special guest, and I'm very happy to introduce him. He is one of the important person who is going to enlighten us on the very important topic of our syllabus, of our study material, ecology, ecosystem, and agriculture of India. And I'm happy to mention that Professor Gunti S. Murthy is a faculty at the discipline of bioscience and biomedical engineering at IIT Indore. Before coming to IIT Indore, he worked as a professor at Department of Biological and Ecological Engineering, Oregon State University, Corvallis, Oregon, USA. He is a co-founder of GRW Engineering Limited Company and worked as a resource recovery company focusing on fertilizers, metals, organics, and landfill, as well as a professor. Murthy has a wide research interest on the sustainable bioprocessing and system analysis, and he has accepted our invitation to talk to all of you all about the ecology and the agriculture of India. He is going to enlighten us on the subject and the title, as I mentioned, from our textbook or rather the study material which we have recommended. So I welcome Professor Gunti Motiji and I request you to please enlighten all our students, viewers, and parents who are interested to listen to your wonderful talk. And thank you for accepting our invitation. Thank you, sir, and the forum is for you.
Oh, Mata Pitaro Nama Sabhai Namaha. Thank you so much, Dr. Ranade, for that great introduction. And hello, all my young friends there and all my colleagues. Namaste. So today, my name is Ganti Murthy, and I will be talking about ecology and agriculture in India, giving you a perspective from the past, current, and the future. Essentially, we'll take you through a journey of over 12,000 years today in our lecture today. And then the big thing that you might all have is, why should you listen to today's lecture? So the reason why this lecture is important is because there are so many philosophies and ideologies that are out there, capitalist systems, socialist systems. So is there an Indian way when we talk about ecology and agriculture? Now, if there is an Indian way, is it worth studying what our ancestors thought? Is it worth studying what our ancestors did really practice? Then, if there was something that we study, is that important today? Is that relevant today? How will that study help us today? And then, why should you care as students? So these are some of the questions that I will try to answer today. Therefore, I hope at the end of the lecture today, you will be able to get some idea about a few of these things, and then your time that you spend here will be productive and fruitful. So then, going straight away into this topic, what did Indians think? What did Bharatiyas think? The civilizational ethos of Bharat is that everything in nature is divine and we are part of it. If you The famous verse of Ishavasya Upanishad begins with this, that Ishavasyamidam jagat yatkincha jagatyaham jagat. Whatever you see is divine. The divine God is part of everything that we see, hear, touch, smell, and everything, and beyond that. And we also talk about Bhagavan Shiva as Nataraja is an epitome of this thought process, the way that how the creation and the creator cannot be separated from each other. So the Nataraja represents the how, just like how you cannot separate the dancer and the dance. They are both there at the same time, and the moment a dancer stops dancing, the dance goes back into the dancer. And then, as he or she dances, the dance comes out of the dancer. Just like that, the whole creation that we see is essentially the thought process behind that is coming out from that one creator and then going back to that Shiva. And that is what that Nataraja really depicts in various forms of sculptures, paintings, and everything. And that is really the epitome of this thought process that the Upanishad Vakya says, Ishavasyamidam Jagat. And this is a pan Indian thought process. I studied in Arunachal Pradesh, and then the Arunachalis there have a religion called Doni Polo. They always say that they are Doni O Polo Ome, which means they are the children. They say that we are the children of sun and the moon, and which, in fact, if you think about it, is really what a lot of our Indian civilizational ethos is about. We are the children of sun and moon. And then all the dharmic traditions of India have recognized that humans are part of the nature and we are not really superior in some sense. We are part of the nature and part and parcel of that. Why is this important? Because if you look at ecology, the classic definition ecology, it is the relationship between the animals, humans, nature, plants, and the environment. So when you talk about that, it is very important to see where we as human beings are placed in that relationship. And therefore, the civilizational ethos of Bharat is very, very different from a lot of the Western civilization in the sense that we do not consider ourselves to be separate or superior to any of the creation or the nature that we see. We are part of it and we are part and parcel of that. And all the living and non-living things are connected. This is one of the, again, the traditions of Bharat have recognized this. And then the conservation of nature is not just for conserving the nature or animals or plants, it is actually to conserve ourselves. That is how it is thought of, because if you are part of the nature and nature is part of you, protecting nature, you are essentially protecting yourself. If I'm taking care of my legs or my hand or my eyes, I'm really taking care of myself. This is the way that Bharatiyas thought for ages. And then, as a part of that, if you look at it, we had always what we call as an integrative approach to conserving environment. Uh, you might be familiar with what we call as sacred groves. Sacred groves are those forests, protected forests that are present almost everywhere in India. And in fact, these sacred groves are present everywhere in the world. But the unique distinction of what we have in India is that we have the highest concentration of the sacred groves of India in India. And these sacred groves, people are not allowed to hunt or basically cut down the trees or plants. These are when the people did research in these sacred groves, they have found that these are the hotspots of biodiversity, and these are protected areas that are protected not by governments or some law. This is protected by the communities themselves. And then when you look at all the sacred groves, maybe wherever you are living in India, you'll find a sacred grove that you must be aware of, that or your parents or grandparents are aware of. Please do visit them and see how they protect the environment, where animals are provided shelter, birds are provided a shelter, plants are provided a shelter, and they're all protected together. And these are extremely important in the way to protect our biodiversity. And essentially, that is the importance of the sacred groves in India. And going forward, so again, this just shows you how we thought about the environment, how we thought about nature, that this is something sacred that needs to be protected. And people protected this from times immemorial. I mean, if you some of the sacred groves, we don't even know for how long they have been protected. And then as you can see from the map, these sacred groves are not one part, not located in just one part of India. They are located everywhere, in every part of India. And that shows the Bharatiya civilizational ethos, the unity in diversity, the kind of thinking that we normally talk about. And then when we go into different parts of things, and then we also had very, very important things about, we took care of rivers and water bodies. When you're talking about those things, water, as you all know, is one of the Pancha Mahabhutas. Akasha, Vayu, Agni, Jala, and Prithvi are Pancha Mahabhutas. So water is one of them. The water importance of water was universally recognized since the Vedic times. In fact, Manusmriti has very, very strict punishments for people who actually pollute water or do open defecation near the water bodies. And even in Kautilya's Arthashastra, there are prescribed many, many strict measures to protect both wild and domesticated animals. And there are strict punishments are given to people who cause intentional harm to animals. And then, unlike other places, for in India, for a long time until the Britishers came and all that, the hunting of wild animals for the sake of entertainment was strictly forbidden. Hunting of wild animals like tigers and lions, if they were harming people, was allowed, but just for the sake of entertainment, to take them as trophies, was strictly forbidden from times immemorial. And in fact, it is in this Mahabharata, in Mahabharata Anushasana Parva, you actually see this famous Vakya that we talked about. Ahimsa paramo dharma, dharma himsa uh, तथा हिंसा अहिंसा parodamah, ahimsa paramam danam, ahimsa paramam tapah. It is where in this place that in fact when this verse was actually talked, said by Bhishma as a response to a question by Yudhishthira, when he talks about cruelty and animals. So when we talked about ahimsa paramo dharma, this was in the context of cruelty of animals. There is also this Vakya occurs for the first time in the Adi Parva, and also later in the Vana Parva when Dharma Vyadha talks to a Brahmana about how he doesn't inflict unnecessary cruelty on animals. And this is where we say that any type of himsa, any type of cruelty on animals or any living things is really not looked upon favorably. And in fact, even in Krishi Parashara, there is a verse that says, Vahapidarjitam shasyam phalitam cha chaturganam vahanani shwasavatena tadrutam cha vinashyati. What this means is, when you this says, even getting a lot of profit by causing hardship to the animals by driving them in the fields, all of that will be lost by their size of exhaustion. What that means is, do not harm animals in the farm also. So one talks about harming animals in general in Mahabharata, and then the Krishi Parashara will talk about it later. It's a agricultural text which talks about taking care of animals while farming and doing the other farming operations. Even in Kautilya, Chanakya, in Arthashastra, talks about various strict measures to protect both wild and domesticated animals. There were strict punishments, as I was mentioning earlier, to those who cause intentional harm to animals, and hunting was basically for the sake of entertainment was strictly prohibited. And you must all heard of this Vishnuis, right? This was when villagers humbled a Maharaja for their khejri trees. Khejri trees are trees that are found in areas of Rajasthan, where basically which are used for fodder. They're used for some medicine. They have medicinal uses, and they're really very valuable for people. And when Maharaja came to cut, ordered these trees to be cut so that they can use the wood to make some basically chuna, the lime for the palace, building a palace and fort. Then Mata Amrita Devi basically she said, "Sarasante rook rahe to bhi sasto jaan." Even if a tree stands, for a tree to stand, it is cheap even to give away my head. And 363 Vaishnavis died that day, protecting the Kejri trees. And then the Maharaja saw this, the love of the people for these plants, for the trees, and then stopped doing that. And then after that, he said, no, none of the Kejri trees will be protected. And they're still basically venerated to this day. There is a temple built for these 363 people who died protecting the Kejri trees. So that was the relationship that we had. That was the kind of relationship that we had. This was not long ago. This was 400 or 500 years ago that this incident happened. So you see that there is a continuity of the thought process of how we relate ourselves to the environment, to the animals around us, to the plants around us. In the sacred groves, for example, there are these Naga statues where actually people go and then pray to them. And we all know how Ganeshji's Vahan is a Mushak, and then Durga Mata's Vahan is a Sher, a lion or a tiger, and then all the animals that you see, Garud, snakes, Naga, yeah, all these things are Vahanas of different gods. The point being that these are sacred. Don't kill them unnecessarily. That is the ethos of Bharatiya that we try to protect, conserve the environment. And then more recently, this is the Chipko movement. Basically, villagers again humbled the government for their trees. This was in Uttarakhand, where they protected the trees. About there were these trees were being cut by a company for making some sports goods, and then so the villagers said no, we need to protect the trees, and then they went and they held on to the trees. चिपक गए थे पेड़ों से. And what that did was then the companies and the governments realized that yes, this is not something that we should be doing. And then after that, a law was passed, and these forests are now protected. And these forests provide so much utility to the women folk. And normally in these things, you will see that women are more active than men, which again speaks to how the nurturing aspects of our culture. And then a more recent example is Padma Shri Tulasi Gowdaji. She basically was awarded Padma Shri this year, actually, for her vast knowledge of the traditional herbs and all the plants that were there in the forest in Karnataka. And she used to gather all that traditional knowledge, from that traditional knowledge, all the medicines and things like that, and give it to other people. And then she educated so many people and transmitted all that knowledge. In recognition of her services, government awarded her Padma Shri this year. And so she was preserving, conserving the plants by working together with the, and then taking the just like a honeybee takes uh, the honey but doesn't damage the flower. She was taking the useful things from the forest and protecting it at the same time. And Jadav Payeng, another tribal from Assam, was awarded a Padma Shri in 2015. He single-handedly created a forest in a island in Brahmaputra, and based on when he was very young, he saw that during floods there was a lot of trees that were washed out and a lot of animals were dying, snakes were dying. So he realized one day, if snakes are dying, what would happen if we also die like that one day? And then he talked to his elders who said, you see, the reason that they are dying is they don't have a habitat, they don't have a place to live. The animals are dying, plants are dying because they don't have a place to live. So then he went ahead, and then what he did was he planted the trees one by one and then watered them, took care of them. And now it's a beautiful forest of, I think, 2,500 acres or so. And he did that single handedly. Why am I mentioning this? Again, See, Jadavji is from Assam, and Gaudaji was from Tulasi Gaudaji was from Karnataka. So you see, that is the kind of it's a pan-Indian feeling that we have, that we take care of our ecosystems, and that is a tradition that we need to maintain, and we should be genuinely be proud of in India. And then this Padma Shri Saluma Marada Timmakkaji. She was awarded Padma Shri again in 2019. She planted herself more than 8,000 trees single-handedly, again, just like Jadavji. And what she did for her efforts, she took care of them, not just planted them, but used to water and take care of these plants. And she was basically awarded Padma Shri in 2019. And you can see the President of India, she is blessing the President of India, who is the Chief Commander of Armed Forces of Republic of India and one of the largest democracies of the world, humbled and doing a namaskara to a old woman. And that is the again the civilizational ethos of our country. We respect people who actually do work like this, and that is essentially that picture itself, where the president of a country is bowing down and a old woman in that country is blessing the president, just speaks about what we are about, how we approach conserving environment, ecology, things like that. And again, this what were our views on agriculture and food? If you look at it, so transitioning from the ecology to the agriculture, if you look at it, the Kshetrapati Sukta of Rigveda is essentially devoted to agriculture. So we had again a very long tradition of agriculture in India, and it talks about Avrachi Subhage Bhava Sita Vanda Mahetva. This is one place where you see the word Site. This is a reference to Sita, which is the pointed tip of the plow. And this is also the first place where Sita occurs before Ramayana in the Rig Veda. And then the Bhrigavalli of Taittiriya Upanishad also commands Annam Brahmeti Vyajanat, Annam na Nindyat Tad Vratam, Annam na Parichakshita Tad Vratam, Annam Bahukurvita Tad Vratam, Tasmad Jaya Kaya Chavidaya Bahvannam Prapnuyat. What it means is know that the food is Parabrahma. Don't disparage food. Don't basically say food is bad or things like that. And don't waste food. Make efforts to produce a lot of food. Annam Bahugurvita. This was the injunction that we were given. Make sure that you produce a lot of food. For what? To obtain a lot of food for serving others. This is not just to enjoy, but to serve others. And you might also be familiar with what we call as Pancha Bhuta Yajnas. So, where we do feed not just ourselves, but we feed the guests who come, animals that are there, and we give it to offer it to the gods. And that is how we divide our five food into five parts. So, there is a lot of tradition of producing a lot of food and sharing with everybody. And then there are, when you talk about specifically about the agriculture, there are also several verses in Krishna Yajurveda that talk of agricultural operations. So when you look into the specific verses that talk about it, for example, they make a very clear distinction between the wild and domesticated crops. For example, they say that Nivaraha, which means any variety of rice. And they also use a word called Vrihaya, which means for they use it for wild rice. And for the domesticated rice, they use the word Anavaha. So when somebody talks about these three varieties in such different, clearly distinct categories, this shows that people were aware of what was wild, what was domesticated, and then what was a combined species or the group of that crops. And then they had knowledge, for example, of very important crop development stages. Why is this important? This shows that we had a history, even in the times of Krishna Yajurveda, of actually sustained agriculture, sustained basically stable agriculture, and clear knowledge about the agricultural science and engineering. Why is this important? This is important because a lot of historians say that all the Vedas were written by nomadic people. But what the actual texts show is that these were written not by nomadic people, but people who had a sustained civilization for thousands of years before they were written. And then, for example, there are some verses there that exhort farmers to say, okay, you should consult the experts or the wise men in your community, especially when you are doing land preparation, plowing, or furrowing, or maintaining the furrows. What does this mean when people are trying to plow the land? make sure that the land is prepared well for the crop, for the seed, placing the seed in the uh, land, or making the furrows so that you can irrigate it with water. In these things, they say, okay, you should go and consult the wise men. But then there are also some verses where they say, okay, you should invoke divine blessings. These are, for example, during the grain filling stage of the crops, which is very, very important stage. After flowering, the grains form, and then during that grain filling stage, it is very, very important that the plants get adequate light, adequate water, so that they actually, the grains will be full, and then you get a full yield. Otherwise, what will happen is you'll have a crop that doesn't produce any rice, wheat, or whatever, barley, or whatever crops that we're trying to grow. So it's very important there that you should get the weather conditions exactly right. But then you all know that we don't really control the weather. Therefore, in these stages, they invoke the blessings of Surya, Marudganas, and Varuna. Surya is for the sunlight, Marudgana is for the winds, and the Varuna is for the water. So you can see places where we can control, like the land preparation, plowing, the furrowing, maintenance of furrows. These are things that we can actually put effort and make sure that these things are done really right. There, they say, okay, go and consult the experts so that they will help you out. But then, when there are things that we cannot really control over, they say, okay, you can't do much about it, just pray to the God, essentially. Then, when we look into this thing, this kind of discussion about the agricultural operations, such as all the plowing, furrowing, seeding, cultivation, irrigation, there is weeding, harvest, classification of the crops, all these indicate that there was an established system of very advanced agriculture in the society with high level of expertise. Again, this is another uh, verse from Chamaka Prashna of Krishna Yajurveda, which makes a humble request to the god, saying, please provide us kuyavaha, which means small grains, or annam, akshut, vrihayaha, yavaha, mashaha, tilaha, mudga, khalvaha, godhumaha, masuraha, priyangavaha, anavaha, shamakaha, nivaraha. All these things are different types of grains. If you look at what they are basically rice, barley, beans, sesame or til, moong dal or green gram, uh, khalvaha, all the lentils, dals, godumaha is gemu, and masuraha is again black gram, for example. Priyangavaha, little millets. Anavaha is again rice. Shamakaha are another type of millets, and wild rice. So all these are the crops which we grow even now. So these were the varieties that were already domesticated by the time of Krishna Yajurveda, and then we talk about that in the Chamaka Prashna. So now, when you think about these, what does this indicate to you about the antiquity of how old our civilization is? Are we old, only like 3,000 years old or 4,000 years old? Please do think about it. There is, in fact, confirmed evidence for agriculture in India that we practiced stable, sustained agriculture about 10,000 years from the present. So that's about 8,000 years BCE. And then there were, during the Sindhu Saraswati civilization, or Saraswati Sindhu civilization, as it is more appropriate to call, because most of the sites that have been discovered are on the banks of Saraswati River. They had three tiers of crops in their importance. So the first tier of crops were wheat and barley. And if you look at it, in that region, still wheat is one of the important crops, and barley is an important one. And then the second tier crop was ragi, and then the tuar, chana, moong dal, field pea, linseed, mustard, cotton. These were some of the other crops that were important. And then finally, rice was just being cultivated at that point. It was not a big crop there in during the Saraswati Sindhu civilization or Harappan civilization, as you might study in your textbooks. So after that, so there was a accelerated phase of development in agriculture, in Indian agriculture, about 8,000 BCE to 0 CE. What happened between the phases of the Harappan civilization and 800 BCE? What happened was that Saraswati River stopped being perennial because both the Shatadru, Satluj, and the Yamuna parted ways because of some tectonic movements. So Satluj became a tributary of Sindhu, Indus River, and then Yamuna became a tributary of Ganga. So then the Saraswati River, which was earlier having flow from both the rivers, these two rivers did not have enough flow of water, so then it slowly dried up, and it became it's very established now that it became channeled and it dried up slowly. And right now, these days, Ghaggar is the river that goes through Rajasthan. It just gets lost in the Thar Desert. So that river, as that dried out, the Sindhu Saraswati civilization slowly moved away, and there was some kind of a latent time when it was not expanding as such. But then around 800 BCE to 0 CE, then there was an accelerated development again. This was around the time when we had Mauryas, Chandragupta Maurya, Chanakya, and this was also the time when there was a lot of Buddhist and Jain religions was spreading in India, which promoted more of vegetarianism, especially the Jainism, and therefore there was more emphasis on these crops and more of these things that happened. So essentially, when you look at it, the agricultural science and engineering was really well developed in India. And in fact, we have the first known textbook on agriculture, the Krishi Parashara, which was considered composed in 4000 BCE. And there was another book, Kashyapiya Krishi Sutta by Kashyapa Maharshi, that was again published sometime before 800 CE. We don't exactly know when it was published. There is another book called Lokopakara by Chaudaraya in 10,025 CE. Surapala's famous book, Vriksha Ayurveda, was written in 1000 CE. So about 1,000 years ago, we had already had 4 or 5 textbooks on agriculture. This is in addition to the other knowledge that was being practiced. Upavana Vinoda by Sarangadhara, Vishwavallabha by Chakrapani Mishra, Manasollasa, and Muskadar Fanni Falahat by Darasiko in 17th century, and then Krishi Gita by Parshurama in 17th century. These are all different books that are there in on agriculture, dedicated specifically to agriculture, the technical text. As you can see, we have again a continuous, almost a continuous tradition of well-researched science and engineering in agricultural sciences. Then Chanakya devoted actually several chapters to agriculture and its proper management. So there was a separate head of agriculture who was called Sita Dhyaksha. And even during Chanakya's time, that's about 2500, 2700 years, 2500 years ago, we had they had three cropping patterns called wet crops, Kedara, winter crops called Haimana, and summer crops called Graishmek, which corresponds to basically the Kharif, Rabi, and Zaid crops today. The Kharif crops starts in July, Rabi in December, January, and then the Zaid crops in the summer, essentially. So those are the same pattern that we follow. So you see, there is again a continuity in the agriculture that we follow. And interestingly, in Chanakya's Arthashastra, he talks about how there should be some the farmers who dig a pond on their farm to harvest rainwater should be exempted from taxes for 5 years. This is like giving a subsidy, and this is perhaps the first instance where it is noted down that farmers should be given subsidy or exempted from taxes if they do this. This is a instant incentive given to the farmers during that time. Then moving on, so now I hope I have convinced you that there was first of all we always thought of ourselves as a part of nature in the ecological perspective, and we had a very close relationship between the plants, animals around us, and with the nature. And moving on to the agriculture, we have about 10,000 years worth of continuous development in agriculture in our country, and we had a lot of it was a very well developed science. A lot of textbooks were written. People had very scientific classifications, which are even relevant today in the sense, like the cropping patterns that we talked about, which was there in Chanakya's time, and many other things. And so now going on to another important aspect of agriculture is the water, rains, and weather forecasting. Why is this important? Because essentially, if you look at it, agriculture is dependent on water. And if we don't have enough water, no matter what you do, plants will not grow. So the way that we thought about the relationship between the agriculture and the atmosphere was that there are two levels at which there are influences on agriculture. So it was thought of as a triangle. So the atmosphere or the biosphere had a cosmic part, which was essentially the movement of the sun's planets and the moon, and then the constellations. That was the astronomy part of it, and not astrology, astronomy. Please make that distinction. Astronomy is the scientific study of all the planets, sun, moons, and their movements, and using those to predict things. But astrology is using that for our personal lives. That is not what I'm talking about. This is the Jyotishya, or the astronomy as we call it, which is a part of the Vedanga. And then there is also this atmosphere or biosphere, which is essentially about the environment that surrounds us. So, and then how is that related to the agriculture, the Sheti? So these three were thought to be three parts, and their intersection was where we needed our interventions to make sure that we understand the clues from the space or the sun, moon, planet, their movements, and then the local environment, and make sure that those work well for our agriculture. For example, the importance of water, I mean, was recognized very early, and they knew that the fire creates vapors. So there is a verse in Shatapatha Brahmana, Agnirve Dhumo Jayate. What that means is, from the fire, Dhumaha, vapors come out. Dhumat Abhramaha. From the vapors come the clouds. Abhramaha means clouds. And Abhrat Vrushti. From the clouds, the rain. So you see how the fire, Agni, is not simply fire here. What agri means is also heat. So one something that burns away everything. That's what that means by agri. So you can see that essentially this is talking about evaporation of water, creation of water vapor, formation of the clouds, and then the vrushti, the forming falling of the rain. And in fact, in Vedas, if you look at what they talk about in the Ashwamedha Yajna ritual, they talk about rainfall as Purvachitti. What does Purvachitti mean? This means this is prior wisdom, that you actually can get knowledge about future rainfall. You can predict the future rainfall based on today's conditions. I will talk about how that can be done in the next slide. And again, similarly in Bhagavad Gita also, Bhagavan Shri Krishna talks about it. There is a verse that says, Annat bhavanti bhutani. From the all the living things come from Anna. Parjanyat Anna Sambhava. Parjanya means the clouds. And that basically is the basis for the Anna. Anna is formed from the Parjanyat. Yajnat bhavati parjanyo yajna karma samudbhava. Clouds form basically come from yajna, and yajna is based on the karma. This yajna doesn't just mean simply havan, it also means any effort, collective effort of the universe too. It has a slightly different meaning than the simple havan. So, and in the end, everything comes down to the efforts of not just our personal efforts, but also the universal efforts. So essentially, it says go from the personal to the universal, to the clouds, to the food, to the living. So essentially, the basis of all foods is Anna. And this is what the importance of water, as you can see, was kind of recognized even in that way. And some of the people who were known for their weather predictions are Rishi Kashyapa, Parashara, Gautama, and Vatsa. So when they talk about these predictions, they talk about two kinds of predictions. One is a short-term prediction, and another one is a long-term weather forecast. And for example, the Krishi Parashara and this discusses some really long-term forecasts, which are like 6 to 7 months in advance. And short-term is essentially less than 1 week predictions. And they talk about different things. It's very interesting how they make these predictions. When they talk about the long-term predictions, which if you think about it from a earth perspective, going around the sun, it is essentially is about the other side of the sun, essentially. So you can see from the figure that on the day one it is on the left side of the sun, and then on 195 days later it moves exactly about 180 degrees there. So that is the basically the duration at which they will predict. You must all be familiar with the panchang that we get. So these panchangs, for example, even today, they are made in December, November, December timeframe. And they predict the rainfall that is going to happen in June and all. So, for example, why is that important? For example, Varaha Mihira in Brihat Samhita, he talks about something called Garbhotam stage in the day one, for example. And he says, just like a human being has this garbhadharana, or has this fetus in the mother, inside the mother, and then there is a gestation period, and then the baby comes out 9 months later. Similarly, he talks about garbhottama, where there are these seeds for the clouds or the rainfall in future is implanted in the nature about 6 to 7 months earlier. And this actually has scientific basis in the movement of the jet streams. And he talks about how Based on that, they can make predictions observing the atmospheric conditions in December, for example, on November time frames, Kartika Masa and Phalguna, or Kartika and Margasira Masas, and then they make predictions for the Varsha Ritu. That is going to come 6 to 7 months later. So again, they observe the jet streams. How do they observe the jet streams, you might ask? So, for example, there is a very famous ritual in one of the Atharvana Veda, where the practitioner is asked to go to a top of a mountain, small hill, and then observe the Kritika Nakshatra. So Kritika Nakshatra is basically one of the Pleiades. In English, it is called Pleiades. Uh, so when we observe that, they say if that Kritika Nakshatra is covered with smoke, then they say that you will have good rain. If it is very clear, you will not have good rain 6 months later. Why is that important? Then, when people actually found out that the stage, when you look at the Kritika Nakshatra during the December Kartika Masa, when you look at it, if there are clouds on it, what that means is that jet stream that is going to be affected is actually coming down to the towards the equator, and therefore it is a little cloudy. And what that means is this jet stream will evolve later, and the monsoons will come on time 6 to 7 months later. But if that jet stream doesn't come down to that level, then the monsoon will not happen. There will be erratic rains. So that is why they say that that jet stream there means there are these small clouds that you can see in the Kritika Nakshatra at that time, and that means your rainfall is going to be better. And if that doesn't happen, then the rainfall is not going to happen. So this is again some of the things that they talk about based on the observations that they make, and it's not simply just some predictions that they come out of some random thing. They actually go and do these predictions in a very, very systematic way. And again, Parashara, Rishi Parashara, for example, in the Rishi Parashara distinguishes four types of clouds: Avartana, Samavarta, Pushkara, and Drona. These are very similar to our four clouds that we have in modern day, nimbus, cumulonimbus, cirrus, those kind of classifications now. And if you look at this, the modern day weather forecast also has what we call as nowcasting, for which is very valid for only a few hours. Short range weather forecasts are valid for 3 days, medium forecasts of 3 to 10 days, long term forecasts of for more than 10 days. And you see how these some of these things are actually similar to what the short-term predictions that were being made earlier. And then the really long-term ones, we do make them now, but again, there are so many things. We right now we use a lot of the supercomputers and things like that to use it. So there is a lot that we can learn from these traditional methods there to improve the forecast. I'm not saying we will be able to replace it. We can learn a lot so that we can actually improve the forecasts of even our weather data right now, the weather forecast right now. So that is something to think about. And now coming on to the actual food production. If you look at the food production, India right now, so that up to that point, I have talked about what happened in the past. Now I'm going to talk about what is there in the current scenario. If you look at currently in India, we are fortunate, we are blessed to be self-sufficient in food production, despite fourfold increase in the population. Our population was like around 33 crores in 1947. Right now we are 134 crores. So despite about a fourfold increase in population, we are self-sufficient in food. But then it was not always so. We are not always self-sufficient. Before uh, greenhouse, basically the green revolution thing, we were not self-sufficient always. So until the 1970s, we were dependent on foreign aid to avoid famines, and unfortunately, that was not a very proud moment for our country. And we should make sure and resolve that we'll never ever go back to the days when we had to literally beg for food. It should never happen again in India. And for that, it is important that we do make sure that we are self-sufficient in food. What we did in 1970s and after that was this green revolution that we talk about. It made India largest producers of many products, and we are largest producers of rice, tea, many other things, and we are self-sufficient in food production. But then there were costs. What were the costs? The cost was that we had depleted the soil organic carbon content. So when you see sand, you take sand, pile of sand, you see how it flows. But then if you take a garden soil, it feels very soft, wet. So that soil organic carbon is the difference between sand and the soil that you touch. in the garden soil that you touch, which is very wet. Then the depletion of the groundwater is a big challenge around throughout the country. There's huge amount of water pollution because of nitrates and all the other things. Overuse of fertilizers, they seep into the groundwater and cause lots of pollution. Similarly, overuse of pesticides, it has led to what I mean, in Punjab area, there are actually so many cancer cases that a daily train runs with all the cancer patients. It's called a cancer train, and it's very sad to see our annadatas, our farmers who are helping feed all of us, suffer from cancers and their families suffer from that. So that is the downside of it. And then there is a lot of loss of biodiversity. With the Green Revolution, the emphasis was on producing food using hybrid seeds and hybrid seeds, using what I would call as post Second World War production methods, which depended on heavy use of fertilizers and pesticides and a lot of farm machinery usage, for example. And all that has led to loss of biodiversity in the sense that India has a tremendous amount of biodiversity in terms of seeds. Even the crops that we grow, there are so many varieties of paddy. So there is, for example, a variety of rice in Assam called Agnibhusa. If you take that rice and just add some water to it, after 15 20 minutes, it becomes like this chida or beaten rice, and you can actually eat it. So, and then there is a variety of rice in, think in Jharkhand, which grows to about 7 feet tall, and that can grow. That doesn't require standing water. And there is another variety of rice in, I think, in Bengal, Orissa border there, which actually can grow in salt water. Now, with all this green revolution, we are not even conserving those varieties, and they're all getting lost. So there is a lot of loss of biodiversity that I speak that is there. And then there is also loss of seed security because now the farmers every year they go and buy this from some corporate companies, and earlier they used to preserve their seeds and then use it for the next season from their previous harvest. But now they have to go and purchase it. What that means is they don't have the security of the seeds for the next farming season, and that's a very that has huge implications on the national food security. That is something that we all should be thinking about. And then, based on all these different things, there was a agricultural vulnerability matrix, a map that was created, and you can see a lot of the regions in Tamil Nadu, Andhra, Telangana, Karnataka, Maharashtra, lots of places in Gujarat, Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, all these belts, Jharkhand, you'll see a lot of them have very high vulnerability to in terms of agriculture. And what that means is the people here, the farmers here, will suffer a lot because of either non-arrival of rains, for example, or some issues with the seeds or harvesting markets. There are so many things that the agriculture itself or the soil, all of that is really vulnerable here. And these are the places that we need to be thinking about. And then going on to the other aspect of the green revolution I was touching upon earlier, that we have increased our urea usage. For example, right now we use about 30 million metric tons of urea, and ammonia is another 17 million metric tons, and phosphorus is 6.86 million tons. Why do I talk about phosphorus? Phosphorus, unlike urea or ammonia, if you have enough solar energy, you can actually produce ammonia. There are ways to do it. So if you have access to energy resources, you can produce ammonia because there is nitrogen in air. You take that, take hydrogen from the electrolysis of water, combine those two, you will get ammonia, which is NH3 molecule. But phosphorus is not like that. Phosphorus is a mine resource. What do you mean by mine resource? Just like coal. How do you get coal? You have to go to a mine, dig it up, and get it. How do you get steel ore, iron ore? You have to go to a mine, dig it, and get it, and then make iron. But once you finish that ore, it is not there anymore. It doesn't get replenished, so it doesn't exist. And then similarly, phosphorus is also a mine resource. So once the stores of phosphorus are used up, we don't really have any source of phosphorus. And scarily, India imports all of its phosphorus from places like Morocco and Jordan. Indian phosphorus comes from mostly from Jordan, and there are only 4 or 5 places in the world where phosphorus deposits are available. And unless we really make sure that we secure our phosphorus resources, our agriculture will be in trouble. And then we have 1.3 billion people. So remember what this will do to the food security of India. If we don't have enough phosphorus to the plants, if we don't give them enough, the plants will not survive. It's an essential element, the NPK. So this is the P. And so it's a very important thing to really conserve and make sure that we have enough of it. Fortunately, it is very easy to conserve. If you prevent soil erosion, most of the phosphorus actually runs off in the soil. So if you prevent soil erosion, you also conserve phosphorus. So there are multiple benefits to preventing soil erosion. You see how this is becoming from one dimension to so many other dimensions. Preventing soil erosion is also good for the health of the rivers, for example. The fish and can survive better, and it helps preserve the basically the health of river ecosystems. So it has so many, agriculture is so intimately connected to the ecology. That is why the topic of today's topic was agriculture and ecology together. Another important thing, we talked about how water was recognized as a very important thing in our throughout our civilization. What does it mean in today's life terms, today's terms, for example? So if you notice, if you eat a cup of rice, a bowl of rice, small bowl of rice, that requires about 250 liters of water. And if you look at a chapati, for example, one chapati will require about 110 liters of water. What is 110 liters of water? You normally take bath in a small bucket, right? So that bucket is about 10 liters of water. So you need 11 buckets of that water to grow wheat, which will give you one chapati. So a tomato is about 25 liters. A glass of milk that you drink is about 255 liters of water. An apple is 125 liters. And the dairy milk chocolate that you eat is about 2,600 liters of water. So you can see how much water there is in each of these things. Now it gets worse. If you look at any animal proteins, eggs, 196 liters of water per egg, and chicken, 4,000 liters of 300 liters of per kg, so on and so forth. And if you look at any beef or something like that, it is off charts, 15,000 liters. So that is the reason why we always had in India cow protection thing. That is one of the reasons that it really helps. And then if you look into the fabrics, a jeans pant is about 8,000 liters of water. That is how much water you require to grow the cotton that goes into the jeans pant, for example. So as you can see, we don't think of how much water we are using when we are buying a jeans pant, right? We don't think of how many liters of water we are wasting when we throw away tomato because there is a small spot there or something like that. So what happens is a lot of the water demand that we see, the water that we actually drink and use it for daily uses is actually very, very small part, as you can see here, of what the water we actually use. We use a lot of water for producing electricity. We use a lot of water for basically our clothes and everything. And those are all big, big usages of water that we are not normally aware of. This kind of water, which is invisible, is called virtual water footprint. Virtual water. So, for example, if you want to eat a piece of pizza, the tomatoes that come from require water. The wheat that is used to make the flour requires water. The cow that eats and the grass and all that to make that cheese that goes onto the pizza requires a lot of water. All of that stuff becomes huge amounts of water. So now think about what India is doing. For example, when we export sugarcane, or when we export sugar, or when we export some mangoes from India to some country, what we are doing is we are not simply exporting that piece of mango, or we are not exporting simply that sugar. We are exporting water that was grown, used to grow that sugarcane to some other country. And you can see that India is actually a net exporter of water. Okay, so we export water to mostly to Europe through our food products and those kind of exports that we are there. So something to think about. And so this issues that we are talking about today is not simply a country specific issue. It is a global issue, and it's important even globally because we are already exceeding the climate boundaries. So there is a climate change. The global carbon dioxide concentrations in the atmosphere are increasing. The biodiversity loss is something that really bothers me because that is off charts. We are losing so many species, about 60 species every day or some every month or something like that. very high number. And then the nitrogen cycle, overuse of fertilizers is causing, that is also beyond the limits of what is sustainable anymore. And we are just approaching that limit, the ocean acidification part too. So these are all some of the boundaries that our planet Earth can have handle, and we are already exceeding some of them. And within the Indian context, again, I will return to that soil organic carbon content. Again, now I have talked about the current challenges, where we are and current challenges, and I would like to take you to some of the future things that you guys can do, for example. So I talked about how the soil organic carbon density is so low in India. So you can see it's pretty low because we are a tropical country and things like that. So one of the ways that we need to be very careful about to help preserve our food security. If we want food security, if you don't want to our country to go and beg other people to say, please sell us wheat, please sell us rice and things like that, like we used to face even in 1960s. If we want to do that, if we want to say that we want to produce our food in our country, one of the things we need to ensure is that our agriculture is preserved. And if we want to preserve our agriculture, there are a few things that are very, very important. One of the most basic things is we need to make sure that our land on which the crops grow is healthy. And the health of the land is determined by the soil organic carbon content. And what is that soil organic carbon? Remember, I was telling you how if you take sand, it will just flow through. And whereas if you pick up a lump of garden soil from the बगीचा में से मिट्टी लेने से नरम होता है ना? So that is the difference. That is the soil organic carbon that is there in it. And in India, we are losing a lot of soil organic carbon. It is not just in India, everywhere in the world. But in India, it is much more drastic because we need to be thinking about that. And it is here that some of our ancient knowledge can help us. For example, in Vriksha Ayurveda, which Surapala wrote about 1,000 years ago, he talks about a liquid manure which is called Kunapa Jala. What is Kunapa Jala? Kunapa Jala is made from discarded meat, bones, ऑयल केक जो तेल निकालने के बाद जो केक बचता है ना वो पल्सेस जैसे चना दाल दैट हनी जैगरी ये सब मिला के उबालते हैं उसको दे बॉयल इट in a iron pot for about 15 hours or so. Then they let it cool. उसको ठंडा करके 15 दिन बाद उसको फिल्टर करते हैं. जो पानी निकलता है, the liquid that comes out is called kunapajala, and they take it and then use it as a spray on all the plants. And it is said that it helps improve the plants. It helps improve the soil. So now, ये सब is that all mumbo jumbo? ऐसा वैसे कुछ तो लिखा हुआ है क्या? अगर काम करता है तो कैसे काम करता है why does it work how does it work can we improve it these are some things that we can really think about right so we did some experiments actually with what we call as algal biomass mixed algal bacterial biomass we used it to as a fertilizer to grow spinach. The plants that you see there are grown using the algae fertilizer that you see on top. And when we grow them and compare it to synthetic fertilizers, all of that, you actually see that they are comparable. So basically, अगर synthetic fertilizers, यूरिया वो सब डाल के अगर 1,000 किलो आता है पर एकड़, तो इससे भी ये जो algal bio fertilizer उससे भी 1,000 किलो आएगा जो plants पे. But then the important thing is it actually improves the soil health. Soil में जो bacteria होते हैं, microbes होते हैं, fungi होते हैं, all their interactions with the plant is very very important. And what Kunapajala does is actually उसमें अगर उसका composition देखेंगे, so it has what we call as long polysaccharides, small oligosaccharides, and individual saccharides. And it has long proteins, protein peptides, polypeptides, and it also has simple amino acids. When you have all of these things, it really stimulates the bacterial growth, stimulates the fungi growth in the soil. All of that really helps the plant roots, and together the soil health is improved. The soil organic carbon content is maintained, and the functionality of the soil really improves, and there is a lot more nitrogen fixation and things like that. So that is something that we actually found from our research. And this is where the Kunapajala that Surapala was talking about in Vriksha Ayurveda is really helpful. We can actually learn a lot from that and then see how we can improve it. And then there are other fertilizers that are mentioned. So this algae fertilizer I was talking about, we actually produced in this algal bioprocess treatment, which was used to treat municipal wastewater. So जैसे घर से wastewater आता है, so this was a method to treat that, and we can get this fertilizer from it and use it as a fertilizer for our plants. And then there are other fertilizers that are mentioned like Panchagavya, Dhanyagavya, Sasyagavya, Insa free, जो मच्छी मर जाते हैं, जो खराब मच्छी होते हैं, they take that मछली, उनको वो डाल के बनाते हैं इंसा फ्री. They take dead fish that are discarded and they make it. And then they use methods using mustard, for example, for pest control. White mustard fumes. They use it as a fumigation method to control pests in orchards. And then all many of these things are used to maintain the soil microbiome. Basically, what we mean by microbiome is all these thousands and thousands of different types of bacteria, fungi, all of them work together in the soil एज ए सिस्टम. जैसे पूरे देश में जो जैसे काम करते हैं वैसे ही लोग जैसे काम करते हैं, वैसे ही बैक्टीरिया भी रूट्स के नीचे रहते हैं, सॉइल के नीचे रहते हैं. दे ऑल वर्क टुगेदर. दैट होल कम्युनिटी इज कॉल्ड माइक्रोबायोम. And to make sure that that is healthy and in the soil, we can use some of these interventions. Therefore, it's important that when you do something from all of these, you should do something impactful. So this is a Inadu cartoon from World Water Day and the Earth Day. So really depicts a lot of things. हमको बात नहीं करना है, हमको actually काम करके दिखाना है कि हमको कुछ तो करना है. हम क्या कर सकते हैं? What can we do? So if you look at the recommendations from the world's scientists warning to humanity, the second notice, they talk about four things. The first thing is they talk about maintaining nature's ecosystem. Second thing that they talk about is reducing food waste. अन्नम न परिचक्षिता, हमको बोला गया था पहले ही तैतरो उपनिषद में, खाने को मत फेंको. That is exactly what even the scientists right now are saying. And then promoting dietary shift to plant-based diets. अहिंसा परमो धर्मः. भीष्म और युधिष्ठिर जी का जो संवाद था उसमें बात किया था उन्होंने. And then increase outdoor education, nature education. So know more about all the education about your outdoors. Know what is there in your locality. See what type of plants are there. See what type of animals are there, and make sure that you try to do something to conserve them. And final slide, there are three takeaways that I would like to provide you for that. The first thing that you can do is understand, study, and advance the traditional wisdom. सिंपली ये बोलने से नहीं चलेगा कि हमारे पास बहुत सारा ये सब टेक्स्ट बुक लिखा था. लिखा था तो क्या है, हमको तो पढ़ना है, हमको पढ़ के उसको आगे बढ़ाना है. इट इज नॉट इनफ टू से कृषि पराशर में कुछ तो लिखा हुआ है, वृक्ष आयुर्वेद में लिखा हुआ है, वो हम लोग के पास टेक्स्ट बुक्स था. दैट इज नॉट going to work. What needs to happen is you guys need to go study, understand it, and see how you can use it in today's life. If you cannot, that is the most important part. Take what is there and advance the traditional wisdom. And the second thing is conserve water resources. Don't waste food and water. And then third thing is again ahimsa paramo dharma. Show compassion to all beings, nurture them. And those are the few three takeaways that I will tell you. And then the two pictures there are Rani Ki Vav in Gujarat, जो पट्टन में है, and then Chola's Grand Anicut, which was built 2000 years ago. Karikala Chola. This is not Karikala Kattappa from Bahubali. This is Karikala Chola, Chola king, who built this in 2000 years ago and is still functional on Kaveri River. And you can see one in the Kaveri River Delta and Kaveri River region in Tamil Nadu, and one in very dry regions of Gujarat. And how we valued we valued uh, our nature, respected it, worked with it to the mutual benefit of ours and the nature, and we protected it. With that, so these three takeaways. Thank you so much for your time, and I would like to thank Vijnana Bharati for basically the opportunity to speak to all the children. And with that, thank you so much, and I'll take any questions if there are. Thank you.
धन्यवाद सर. आपने बहुत ही अच्छे तरीके से हमारे सबके ज्ञान में वृद्धि की है. आपने जिस तरीके से कहा कि हमारी धरा के बारे में, हमारी खेती के बारे में, एग्रीकल्चर के बारे में, हमारे कई सारे जो ग्रंथों की बात करते हैं, कई सारे हमारे पास जो एक धरा है उसमें कई सारी चीजों का जिक्र है जिसकी बात आज के समय में हम करते हैं, जिसमें आपने अहिंसा परमो धर्मा की बात की. तो कई सारे आपने ऐसे उदाहरण हमारे सामने प्रस्तुत किए जिससे ये बखूबी हमें अंदाजा आ जाता है कि हमारी ट्रेडिशनल नॉलेज सिस्टम के अंदर बहुत सारी ऐसी चीजें उपलब्ध है और लेकिन आपने साथ ही साथ में ये भी जरूर कहा कि जितनी नॉलेज रिसोर्सेस हमारे पास है वो ग्रंथों में ही रहे और उसके बारे में हमें पता ना हो, ये गलत है। तो मैं पूरी आशा करता हूं, जिस तरीके से आपने सबसे अनुरोध किया कि जिस प्रकार का ज्ञान हमारे पास उपलब्ध है उसको वास्तविक जीवन में हम किस प्रकार से इस्तेमाल कर सकते हैं, उसको कैसे सजाया जा सकता है, उसमें किस प्रकार से चीजों को और बढ़ाया जा सकता है, इसके बारे में आपने जिस प्रकार से हम सब लोगों का ज्ञानवर्धन किया। आई एम प्रिटी श्योर मोस्ट ऑफ द स्टूडेंट्स हु अटेंडेड द टॉक, they have learned the enriched knowledge that we have from our past. And in fact, as you correctly said, that the knowledge which we already have in the literatures and the various traditional systems, they should not be kept it as an only to talk about it, but first to make use of it, and if required how we can make those necessary modifications, and if required how we implement in a righteous way and in the right perspective. I think your talk was really a great boost to all our children, and I'm pretty sure the content that you delivered will help them, of course, in their Vidyarthi Vigyan Manthan's examination, which has been scheduled in the end of this month. And otherwise, also, the content was so enriched with the things that you covered, right from the ancient period, Vedic period, to the modern time, with the help of the new mechanism and systems that are in the place. So, on behalf of Vidyarthi Vigyan Manthan team, I really thank you so much for giving us a precious time from your busy schedule, as well as making all our children to realize the expectations of our generation that we India look forward. Thank you so much. सभी दर्शकों को मैं ये जरूर बताना चाहता हूँ, जिस प्रकार से आज प्रोफेसर मूर्ति जी ने हमारे बीच में व्याख्यान दिया, और इसी को लेके आने वाले अगले रविवार को और हमारे व्याख्यान की और श्रृंखला में बाकी लोग आपके साथ प्रस्तुत होंगे। मैं इस कार्यक्रम को धन्यवाद देते ने पहले मैं आप सब लोगों को ये जरूर कहना चाहता हूं कि देयर इज समथिंग विच इज अ वेरी सरप्राइजिंग गिफ्ट इज कमिंग टू ऑल ऑफ यू विद इन द नेक्स्ट 1 week time. You will come to know there is a something which is a real surprise to every child who registered for Vidyarthi Vigyan Manthan, but we need to wait for it. And I expect all of you to be alert on this, and not only to alert, you may have to participate in one of the announcements that we will be doing in a very near future, maybe within a week time. I wish you all the best for your examination and all the work that you have been pursuing at this time. So with this, thank you so much from the team of Vidyarthi Vigyan Manthan. Namaskar, dhanyawad. Dhanyawad.